Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 247 DIY. We've got the 2002 WRX backup on the lift, and as you might be able to tell, the rear end of the car is all tore apart, and that's because there's no longer a fuel tank in the car. If you're subscribed to the channel, then you'll remember a little while ago, I had to drop the fuel tank out of this because it had a slight rusted pinhole leak in the top of the tank. I used a fuel tank specific patch to go ahead and patch that up, and unfortunately that patch only worked for me for about a year. The car was parked over here now that it's winter time for a few months, and I came out to the shop one day, I could smell gas and the tank was leaking again. And so instead of just dropping the tank again, patching it again, and probably just running into another leak a year from now down the road, I decided I really just wanted to get a new tank in the car, and that's where we sort of ran into some issues. The reason why the car's tore apart and I haven't filmed anything, or at least you haven't seen it yet, and that's because I tried to save a little bit of money and go with an aftermarket tank that wasn't specifically listed for a turbo variant of this year model Impreza. It took a gamble. Turns out I lost that gamble. It was a tank that's just not going to work. I think I could have made it work, but in the end I wasn't comfortable with putting that car in the tank. I just wasn't going to sleep well at night knowing that I kind of just cobbed a tank together and got it up in the car. So in the end I ended up calling up Subaru. I bought what was, according to the parts guy at my local dealership, the last compatible tank for this car left in the entire United States. No idea if that means there aren't any left or Subaru just hasn't made any more to refill the supply. But either way, as of the filming of this video, this WRX here is receiving the last brand new OEM tank that Subaru offers in the entire United States. So what I need to do now is get you guys caught up to speed on the work that was done and why the original tank I bought is not going to work. And then we need to go ahead and get everything swapped over, get the new tank set up, and once everything's bolted onto that new tank and it's ready, we can go ahead and get it back installed in the car and make sure that this car is ready to be on the road this spring. All right, so we'll rewind a little bit here to when I really wanted this aftermarket tank to work. And I'll go over here in just a minute as to the reasons why this tank didn't end up working. But this is the Leland SIM01 aftermarket tank available for early model Subarus. And as you can see here, it comes in this sort of glossy gray primer that I'm getting scuffed up here with a red Scotch-Brite to get it ready for coating of Raptor lining. And then went ahead and cleaned everything up with some prep spray and masked off all of the flanges and areas that I didn't want covered in Raptor liner. And then I went ahead and used the makeshift paint booth that I set up in a previous video to go ahead and coat the whole tank in a nice coating of Raptor liner. And I talked a little bit more about this tank, but it's really not relevant now that I'm not using this tank. So now it's just time to go ahead and get to work. First thing we're gonna do, lower the car down. We're gonna get the seat bottom out of there so that I can get the covers off both of the fuel pump and the sending unit. We can get all of those electrical connections undone, so we don't have to worry about that when we drop the tank out, having to lower the car at that point. We'll do that first. In the previous video I did of the easy way of getting this tank down, really all I did was a very minimal amount of work needed to go ahead and just drop the whole subframe down with pretty much everything still connected, and then sliding and squeezing the tank out of there. I don't want to do that, so I actually want to get everything down out of this rear end. But again, like usual, doing it with a minimal amount of effort. So obviously the exhaust is going to come down. I do want to get the rear subframe out, so we're going to get the drive shaft out, and then we're going to drop the diff out. But obviously before we can get the diff out, the axles will have to come out, so we're going to pop the wheels off as well. And if I just disconnect the lateral links here, we'll disconnect the sway bar, we'll disconnect the lateral links. I won't disconnect them here. I don't want to throw the alignment way off. Realistically, even disconnecting it here, I'm still, as much as I don't want to do it, I'm probably still going to have to do an alignment, but this will make sure that it's at least somewhat close, not undoing it from the inside of the subframe, which means that in order, once that subframe comes down, for this to clear, we're going to have to take our trailing arms off, or at the very least just swing them down out of the way. And then once we've got the diff, the lateral links, and the subframe drop down out, then this tank because it's an OEM tank. The earlier tank, it has 2 drain plugs, one on either side. We'll go ahead and drain the fuel. I'm at about 3/4 of a tank right now, so that means there should be about 12 gallons in there. So like 3 5-gallon buckets, I think will do the trick just fine. We can go ahead and undo just a couple of evap connections and the fuel filler neck that's up back there, and then we should be able to undo our tank straps, drop the tank down. So let's go ahead, let's just dive in and get to work. right, so we've got the old tank pulled down out of the car right here. It's basically stripped down. I've already kind of got myself prepped and ready to have everything installed onto the new tank, but you can see here, I've already kind of picked this apart. Basically this was like an epoxy that you put down with a fiberglass over the top, and then more epoxy, and just the fuel from underneath just got underneath it, and it loosened up that bond with the epoxy, and it just peeled up, and you can see that the fuel itself pooling on this completely took the rubberized coating that I had put on to make this patch sort of seamless. And so unfortunately this tank is junk, and as I've learned through this whole process of trying to get a new tank, these tanks are actually, at least to be in good condition, are hard to come by. I realized I could have saved myself a bunch of money by maybe getting one out of a junkyard, but I'm up here in the Northeast, so pretty much any tank you go to get out of a junkyard might not necessarily have a leak like that one right there, but basically all of them have started to rust along the seams here, and they're just rusty and nasty. And if you've been following the channel, pretty much everything that I've been doing to the WRX up to this point is anytime I replace a part, anytime I throw anything on the car where I'm taking things off and putting new parts on, I take that time to get all OEM, new bolts, hardware, brackets, everything. It just didn't make sense to throw a rusty, grimy secondhand tank back in the car if I could find one that I was even, happy with in that condition. So then I went ahead and I bought this one. I even went and got some of the factory rubber pads that press up against the body. They didn't want to stick. I don't know if it's because the adhesive on these is old, because they basically just sit in Subaru's inventory for a while, or if it's just this Raptor liner doesn't accept the adhesive, so had to glue them down, which means I had to order new ones for the OEM tank that's going in. But the biggest difference with this is, if you can see here, this does not come on this tank, this little dimple here. I smashed this dimple into this tank because I really wanted it to work. You can see the metal buckled a little bit up here, but I formed a piece of wood into sort of this rounded shape, and then just used a sledgehammer, and I just made this little dimple in the tank here, because you can see here on the stock tank, it has this dimple right here. And up here underneath the rear end of the WRX, that dimple's there to clear this cover for a captive nut, essentially, that's welded to the body. You can see I put some orange grease on there as a transfer mark, just because the tank wasn't quite fitting up there right, and I needed to see where it was interfering, and that's where it was interfering. And if we come over here to the seat backs, you can see down here, this has two bolting points for the seats here, and that captive nut we just saw is for this left-hand bolting point right here. I'm still not 100% sure the entire issue in terms of what fits and what doesn't, because the aftermarket tank here, in the notes it said GC chassis. And I did look up some rear seats for like a GC8 Impreza, and you can see here that they only have the right-hand bolting point, so that kind of makes sense to me. But these tanks, there's a few different brands. This is the Leland SIM01. I believe Spectra makes one, Dorman makes one, and they do list a GD chassis Impreza, but non-turbo GD chassis Imprezas. And then that's where I get confused, because these seats here are not O2 WRX seats. They come with the blue seats and everything. These are out of a 05 2.5 RS, which is non-turbo, and it has that left-hand bracket. So honestly, as far as the compatibility, I'm still scratching my head a little bit. I know I was asking around online, and some people said that they used this tank perfectly fine in wagons, which I guess kind of makes sense, because the seat backs should be bolted in differently, and maybe they don't have that bolting point, and so it fits fine in a wagon. I don't know. All I know is if you have a 2002 WRX sedan, you need to find a tank that has that dimple, or you can do what I did, which is pound a dimple into it, because I think this tank would have worked. After I put that dimple in it, I bolted it up. I temporarily bolted the subframe in. It really seemed to fit, but there's a few differences here where at the end of the day, I just wasn't going to be happy using this tank. And honestly, I don't feel like grabbing a light right now, so you're just going to take my word for it. This tank does have a baffle in the bottom of it where your fuel filter sits, but it's much smaller than the WRX tank. So that was the first thing where I was like, I don't really like that. And then the filler neck on this is just a steel filler neck with just a steel flap on a spring. Down here where the WRX has a plastic inside sleeve that goes over, and then like kind of a safety one-way type valve and everything, so that was different. And also with the rollover valves on the stock tank, there's steel pockets welded in that the rollover valves sit down in. This doesn't have those. And then another thing that I thought was different with this tank, and I'll cover it more here in a little bit, is this bracket doesn't work with the pressure sensor that comes off the stock tank, but there is a little bit of issue with that even with the new tank that I got, and like I said, I'll talk about all that in a minute. The only other thing I noticed is on the back of the tank right here, there's a dimple right there, and that gives you clearance for the rear lateral link cover here, and it's not deep enough. That pocket on the stock tank is much deeper on that tank than this tank, so I would have had to actually do the same sort of thing and pound that dimple a little bit deeper to get the clearance you would need for the passenger side lateral link. And so honestly, with the amount of time and money and effort that I've put into this car, this is, for me, my forever car. I love this car. I'm keeping this car forever. I just wasn't gonna sleep right at night knowing that I just sort of cobbed this tank together, shoved it in the car, made it work. I do think it would work. If I had like a beater car or a daily driver that really wasn't that special to me, I'm 99% sure I could have made this tank work and it would function. It would work just fine. But at the end of the day, I just wasn't going to be happy with it. So I decided I needed to bite the bullet and just buy a new factory Subaru tank, which I went ahead and ordered from my local dealership. Like I mentioned in the intro, I called them and I gave them my VIN number because the digging I did online, I didn't want to spend the kind of money on this tank with some question marks, because the OEM tank for a 2002 Impreza, the specific part number for the original tank for this car is discontinued. And when I was looking online, it showed it was discontinued, but that there was a replaced part number, which was this tank. But then when you looked at the compatibility, it only showed like 05 to 07 STI models. So I just called up my local dealership just to make sure. I asked them, they said, yes, we threw your VIN number in. This is coming up as that this tank will work. And it is 99.5% compatible. But the only difference with this tank is that it has the same style bracket here that aftermarket tank has. The one for my 2002 WRX is different. Instead of being that, it takes the same shape out, but then it folds over to 90 and it has a captive stud on there. So what I did off camera, and you'll see it in a minute, I just threw some paint on it as I made a bracket. So that paint's drying, but real simple. I just welded a couple studs so that it's gonna work on the new tank. I won't talk about it too much because you're gonna see it when I install it. And so as far as getting this tank prepped and ready to go in the car, the only thing I've done so far is, you can see, I've stripped the lines and everything off of the old tank to get ready to swap over. And I took that filler neck that I was telling you about, and I got that installed down in the tank. It's pretty simple. You just kind of pinch the connection point. It's a little clip with two little pinch tabs, and then pull it out of that bracket that's part of the tank, and then it just slips over the steel entry where your filler goes in. So that's all swapped over. I did decide, since I'm going ahead and doing all this anyway, I didn't want to throw all of that old crusty stuff on this tank since it is a brand new tank. And I got new rollover valves from Subaru. I think these were like $35 a piece. And then a new evap vent valve. This was like 45 bucks. And then I even went ahead and got a new sending unit for the left side of the tank to go in. I just have to transfer over the filter sock onto that, so that'll go in there. The only thing I didn't do was get a new fuel pump hanger, because they don't sell the hanger separately. Even in the aftermarket part scene, it's all one with a fuel pump and everything. Subaru wanted like, I think it's like a $400 part, maybe like $350 part from Subaru. But even a lot of the aftermarket ones are still like $200, $250 parts. I just didn't want to spend that money when I had a fully functioning unit. And then I tried again. I took another gamble. I was able to find on eBay a replacement unit, and I was just going to swap everything over. I was just going to use the steel on this, because even the electrical connection is just kind of crimped in there, so I would have been able to swap that over. And I was going to swap everything over, but there was just too many differences with this. If you wanted to use it as a drop-in unit, it probably would be perfectly fine. But the two biggest differences was this sensor here. I'll be honest, I don't know if this is a temperature sensor or what this is, but there is a sensor here This one's larger than the stock Subaru one, so I probably could have just like pinched this bracket down when I put the factory one into this hanger. But the other big difference is this one comes with this weird kind of damper that I don't know. I'm pretty positive the WRX doesn't have, but when I bought my WRX, it already had an upgraded fuel pump in it. But when I look at mine, this steel line that comes down comes pretty much all the way down to here. I'm assuming that there's no line in there because the damper bolts up to here. So I'm not sure what that is, if that's normal or not or what, but all I knew is for me, it was too much of a difference. So that was an $80 gamble that I lost out on. I'll just hang on to this in case I ever need any parts off of it or something, I don't know. So what I ended up doing, if you can see in there, we'll get a better look at it when I install it, is I just took a wire wheel and some abrasive pads on my air grinder, and I cleaned up the top of it, and then I picked up this Alumablast not too long ago for a different project that I haven't started yet, and I'm just painting it that kind of silvery aluminum color, so that's going to look pretty good. So we'll be able to get all that installed, so we'll jump right into getting everything assembled, loaded into this tank, and we can go ahead and put everything back in the car. All right, here's that little bracket that I had mentioned that I made up. Just some scrap steel I had laying around, and then a couple of bolts that I cut the heads off and turned into studs, just so that we can get that 90-degree angle that we need. Not 100% sure how necessary it is, because I don't think that sensor's really gonna go anywhere. It really needs that much support, but since it was there originally on the tank having that support, we're gonna go ahead and just get it bolted up the way it was. All right, so I started to go ahead and get these lines installed, but unfortunately the way that I had originally made that bracket with that stud coming through and a nut on that side, the lines just interfered with the nut too much, and I was just worried about, with those lines pressed up against that nut, eventually potentially rubbing, you know, a hole and getting a leak in one of these lines. So I just cut the stud off and we got it on here, and I just plug welded it right to the factory bracket. Again, I don't know how necessary this little support bracket is, but it's there on the original tank, so I just kind of wanted to retain that. But we should be able to go ahead and install these lines now without interference with that nut there. All right, so the tank's ready to go. That just leaves the tank straps. Unfortunately, the factory OEM straps are discontinued. So I bought a set of aftermarket ones. I think these were like Spectra brand or something like that. But the rubber is discontinued. because it's part of the original part. So I took the rubber covers off of those, washed them up real quick because there was just a lot of sort of dried fuel and stuff on there from that leak. And then the plastics were nice enough where I didn't necessarily need to replace those. So we just cleaned those up, got some new hardware on there. The clips where these plastic panels clip onto the tank itself actually they're not listed as discontinued, but I tried ordering them, and then the super parts place that I ordered from said that they were unavailable with no known ETA on inventory for those. So hopefully I have some other ones on hand that will work for that, because the other ones just snapped when they came out. But we got to get these straps bolted up under the car with the rear bolts in, and then we can work on getting our tank in and getting all of the miscellaneous hoses and stuff hooked up, and finally get it up there bolted up tight. All right, so that's the new tank all bolted up in there. Pretty straightforward. You kind of got to get it in there up most of the way, and then you can run your electrical connection across the top, get it plugged into your sending unit over here, the pressure sensor, and your fuel pump over here. Then you just got a few lines up here, as well as your filler neck that you got to hook back up. We've got all the lines hooked up here on this side. And as far as everything else, the tank went up there smoothly, no real issues. It seemed like getting these tightened all the way down, it seemed like they were a little tight, but that probably could just be because the rubbers the isolators that I glued down to the top of the tank, they're brand new. They haven't been like squished down yet. I did my best to kind of, from the top side inside the car, look down through the access points for both the fuel pump and the sending unit, and it didn't seem like anything was pinched or anything like that. So I just went ahead and tightened them all the way down. So now I'm just gonna go ahead, do a big push, get everything reinstalled here in the rear end. I'm gonna have to run up the road and get some fresh, clean gas to put back in this thing. And I can go ahead and start it, make sure it doesn't have any issues, and then this will be done and checked off the list. right, so I went ahead and set the WRX down here on the wood blocks that I had made for doing the alignment, just because I need to be able to get underneath it. I have to loosen up a few of those suspension points and then torque them to spec under load. But as long as we're at this point, I did have 5 gallons of good clean 93 octane that I threw in there. I primed the fuel pump a few times, so now I just have to cross my fingers, hope that I threw everything back together correctly, and it's going to start up, and then I'll let it idle for a little bit. It's still the middle of the winter. I can't take it out for a drive, but I'll let it idle just to make sure I don't get any evap codes or anything like that that decide they want to throw. But let's cross our fingers and hope it starts. So I went ahead, I let the WRX idle for quite a while, brought it up to temperature, revved it a few times to get those RPMs up. There's no check engine lights, you know, evap codes, anything fuel related like that, and it idled just fine. So that's good news that I put everything back together the same way that it came out. It's always a little nerve-wracking when you tear that much of your car apart and put it back together, whether it's gonna start up and function properly, but it is. And even though I wasn't planning on having to do this project, because I have a whole bunch of parts that I've already bought to do some upgrades here on the WRX this winter, that is one thing checked off the list. It's done. I don't have to worry about it ever again. And so that's everything I got for you in this video, guys. As always, if you like the video, be sure to hit that like button. Feel free to leave a comment below, and if you're not subscribed already, please consider subscribing. Thanks.